Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, today we are going to be recapping on much of the news that has happened since the beginning of the Rosh HaShanah holiday. And a lot has happened in the news. And we here at Israel News Talk Radio feel it is our obligation to be accurate in the news, even though it may not be popular. And right now, the news going around about U.S. Supreme Court Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that she passed away on the Rosh Hashanah holiday, politicians from the left are all trying to quote Jewish sources saying that anyone who dies on the Rosh Hashanah holiday is a righteous person. It means that they were a tzaddik or a tzaddikah, a righteous person. But is this accurate? Our guest today on the show is going to be giving us the source of where it says this and what exactly it means. And again, it may not be popular, what we're going to be presenting to you today, but it is accurate from the source. So we're going to give you what it says. Unfortunately, the left has taken people who have died, and if they can spin it to promote their agenda, they will spin it, making George Floyd, who was tragically killed by a policeman, ignoring his past. This doesn't excuse the policeman for killing him. I want to make that clear. But making him into an angel with wings on his back when he was someone who had put a gun to the belly of a pregnant woman, but using it because it advances the left agenda, and now taking the death of the Supreme Court judge and again spinning it in order to promote their agenda and, God forbid, bring more violence to the streets. Some people are even saying a civil war. I don't like to use those words, but violence definitely to the streets. We'll be right back. We'll be discussing all of this.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, over the Rosh Hashanah holiday, we got the news that U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had passed away. And unfortunately, the radical left, who has an agenda to push, has made it a habit, it seems, to use the dead to promote their views. We saw this happen with the tragic death of George Floyd. And again, I don't think anybody would justify what this policeman did by kneeling on his neck and murdering him. It was killing this man who did not deserve the death penalty for what he was stopped on. However, to then take this tragedy and all of a sudden flip it and spin it to that he was an angel, literally an angel. When I watched the news and saw the funeral where they had a portrait, painting of George Floyd in the background on the stage, in a gold coffin, by the way, with wings. He literally, he was painted with angels' wings and a halo. I was astounded. This is a man who was a criminal in his past. He held a gun to the belly of a pregnant woman, but this did not stop the left of twisting history and spinning the whole situation and making George Floyd out to be literally an angel. Now, we can all be against this injustice of what happened to George Floyd, but to take it and spin it that way, it was not accurate at all, and we want to be accurate because we cannot live on lies. We must live on the truth and say this person was good here, but he failed here. And now we have the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was born as a Jewish woman. However, she did not uphold Jewish values. And then for the left to come up and say that this woman, because she died on the holiday of Rosh HaShanah, means, by according to Judaism, that she was a righteous person, to take that leap and say that. And now they're parading her body all across the many cities in America and using her to promote left-wing radical values, which is anti-Torah. We want to know what is the true story. Is someone who dies on Rosh Hashanah, does that mean that they are a righteous Jew? So we have joining us now Dov Bar-Leib. He is the author of a blog, a very popular blog, by the way, which talks about end times and about Torah, and it's called yearsofawe.blogspot.com. And you can look him up there and read many of the things that he writes. So welcome to the show, Dov Bar-Leib.
Hi.
Hi, Dov. Oh, it's good to have you on. Now, you and I were chatting the other night, and we were talking about this news story. And you were telling me that according to Judaism, when all of these secular or left-wing politicians are coming up and trying to say that because she was she passed away over the Rosh Hashanah holiday, that this meant that she was a righteous Jew, a righteous person. Is this true or is this not true?
It's not true. Not true at all. So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah 17b says there's a group of people that if they pass away on Rosh Hashanah, not everybody is in this group of people, but if you pass away on Rosh Hashanah, there's a very good chance that you're in one of two groups. Either you are perfectly righteous, or you're totally evil. It's one or the other. Because on Rosh Hashanah, what happens is the person is judged on Rosh Hashanah, and the scales before that person. Keep in mind the sign of the zodiac for the month, the scales, and the scales don't have a face because the face behind those scales is the face of God. And if a person on the scales, his merits way outweigh his demerits. His merits outweigh his sins by a tremendous amount. And there's no chance that he's going to. Then what happens is on Yom Kippur, he's also going to be judged as tzaddik. So what happens? Or a perfectly righteous person. So if that's the case, then it's decided and it's sealed on Rosh Hashanah itself. Everything is on Rosh Hashanah for such a person, totally righteous person. And the same thing is true if it's totally wicked. If on the side of demerit, the side of sins outweighs his merits on Rosh Hashanah by a tremendous amount, then the 9 days that follow are not going to change that judgment. Then he or she is also sealed on Rosh Hashanah too. It's only for most of the population where our merits and demerits are pretty much equal that we need those 9 days of repentance to as it were, to rebalance the scales on the side of good. But it's not so. It's not true to say that a person dies in Rosh Hashanah is always perfectly good and perfectly righteous, but a person who could also be totally evil.
All right. Can you give our listeners again the source that you're quoting from?
The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah 17b.
Okay.
Page 17 baked. That's where the source of this stuff is, what I just said. It has to be one or the other. It's not that someone is perfectly, you can't just say someone's perfectly righteous. It could be totally evil, too. And if I look at the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think I would choose the latter and not the former. I'm sorry. She was not perfectly righteous. She showed evidence of being a very evil woman. I'm sorry. I don't know how else to put it.
Why are you saying that? Because people who knew her were saying that she was a very righteous woman, that she was able to argue points without getting angry, that she could, if you didn't agree with her.
Okay, I'll give you an example. Back in the Gemara in Chulin, it says if a person that when a nation promotes homosexual marriage and starts giving out homosexual marriage certificates to the members of that nation, that country is on the verge of being totally destroyed. That God will not put up with nations for very long, nations that give out homosexual marriage certificates, okay, to people who want them. So she was one of five, with a 5-4 decision. There happened to be of the 9 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, there are 3 Jews: Stephen Breyer, Alana Kagan, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is in 2015. And on a 5-4 decision, she voted to force homosexual marriage on all 50 states. And all 3 Jews in the 5-4 decision voted in this way. You can't say that this is a righteous decision. This was a very immoral decision.
Joe, we only have 2 minutes left. We only have 2 minutes left to the segment. What else do you? Why else do you believe this?
The other thing is that when Jonathan Pollard, when he was sentenced, Casper Weinberger sent an extrajudicial note with the judge that to nullify the plea bargain, which Pollard's lawyer negotiated with the court. And Casper Weinberger said, we don't know what Casper Weinberger said on this note, but the judge came back after reading this note and decided that they would throw the book at Pollard for 30, that he'd have to spend 30 years in prison, 3 times the sentence that anybody else had received for spying for any foreign country, including Russia, for the last 70 years. And Pollard got the 30 years in prison, which was the maximum life sentence, but with the possibility of parole. Well, when it went up to the GC Court of Appeals in 1991, and said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg and another Jewish judge couldn't see anything wrong with the way Pollard was sentenced. The non-Jewish judge saw there was plenty wrong and voted for the Pollard to be resentenced. Ruth Bader Ginsburg refused to see the logic of the situation that Pollard had been sentenced inappropriately, and decided that the sentence should stand. And within 2 years, she had proved her loyalty to the United States of America over being a Jew, and she was chosen for the U.S. Supreme Court by Bill Clinton. Again, not the actions of a saintly woman.
And
the actions of
what about her
of
stance on abortion? And we only have 20 seconds.
And abortion, of course, she's one of the biggest proponents of abortion in the U.S. Supreme Court for decades.
Okay.
I mean, you just go on and on and on with this woman. I'm sorry. She voted for all kinds of things which are totally against the Torah.
But the Torah does allow, in certain circumstances, a woman to be able to abort.
Correct. But she voted for people to have a party over it. If they wanted to abort, they could just abort whenever they darn well pleased.
So you're saying at Judaism, it's only in order to save the life of the mother, or for
to save life for limb, or even the long-term mental health.
Okay, but not just because you didn't want to use birth control.
You voted for it just for the sake of convenience.
All right.
which is against totally another, not the acts of a saintly woman. I'm sorry, there's not what. She seemed to show the opposite.
So, Dove, the music's on now, and I just want to. So, you're saying basically that according to Judaism, it could be either way. That either the person is very righteous or has done things that are against the Bible, and they're not righteous.
No, either very righteous or very wicked. He's not usually not an in between person.
All right. Well, we'll let God decide that.
But usually, someone has to be very righteous. Very wicked to fall into that category.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simonto from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simonto, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel. Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
All right, you are listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're going over some of the big news stories that happened during the Rosh HaShanah holiday. And, of course, one of the biggest stories is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a Supreme Court justice for many, many years in the United States. And the left wing, unfortunately and sadly, uses the dead to spin their stories in order to promote their agendas. We saw it happen with George Floyd, the tragic death there, the unjust death of George Floyd. But they also made him out to be an angel, which is not the truth. And we want to follow the truth because we can only have a just and fair and good world when the world has truth as its foundation and not lies. And when we see things like this happening, we must correct. We must correct history. And now we're seeing with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, many Democratic politicians, including Vice President candidate Joe Biden, quoting from the Gemara, from Jewish sources, that saying that she was a righteous woman. Well, we don't know. We don't know. God will decide that. But to say that only righteous people die in Rosh Hashanah, we understand when you go to the source, that is not accurate. And we want to give you accurate information here. According to the Gemara, you could be either completely righteous or you can be completely wicked. When we say completely, we don't mean completely. Everybody has some good in them. Perhaps even Hitler had some good in him where he might have been a very good boyfriend or he might have been a good son. I don't know. But was he a wicked man? Well, I think that the world would concur that he was. However, with the rewriting of history today and the left's tactics, we're seeing many people saying that Hitler is right. Hitler didn't finish his job, etc., etc. So on that note, it is saddens me to see that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was born a Jew, is going to be having her body not buried immediately. And according to Judaism, you want to have the body return to its source, the earth, the ground, as soon as possible, ideally within 24 hours. And sadly, her body's going to be put on display, just like George Floyd, in a gold coffin he was put in, and his coffin went to different places, and now the same thing, it looks like, is going to be happening with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's body. It saddens me as a Jew to see this happening. I would imagine that her soul, at least according to Judaism, is distraught by seeing this happen and not returning to the ground. And in Judaism as well, a tzaddik, or a righteous person, would want his body being buried immediately. It's certainly not a Jewish custom or value. In fact, it's the opposite, to have a viewing of someone's body, to not have that body be buried, but to go around from city to city to lie in wait, etc. So that's where I'd like to leave this story, just to give you the information, and God will decide whether she indeed was righteous, or her value system, her progressiveness, was something that was against the Bible, against human morality. Abortion, homosexuality, marriages of homosexuals to make it legal. I know that many people disagree, but I'm just giving you the information of what the Bible's stance is. All right. So that's that one story that happened over the weekend. Now, interesting enough, also to seeing the decaying of much of America and American values. This news story was disturbing for me to read. It says that it was breaking news yesterday. Justice Department in the United States designates New York City as anarchist jurisdiction. New York City now has become one of 3 cities labeled anarchist jurisdictions by the Justice Department. This was done on Sunday, and the city is now targeted to lose federal money for failing to control protesters and defunding police. This city, New York, has now joined Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, where these other 2 cities were on the list, deemed anarchist jurisdiction. And this was approved by U.S. Attorney General William Barr. I remember New York, how it was touted as being the city that never sleeps, an amazing city, a vibrant city, a city filled with life, going 24/7. And today, people are leaving New York in droves. Whoever can leave, I understand, is trying to leave. There are tens of thousands of empty apartments in New York City today because people are trying to get out because of the chaos and the violence in the streets. One report I heard was from a resident of New York saying that every day they hear gunshots from their windows, from the windows of their homes. New York City used to be a place where the majority of the Jews in the world lived. At one time, there were more Jews living in New York than there were in the state of Israel. However, as history has progressed, Jews have come home. And now I'm happy and relieved to say that the majority of the Jewish people in the world live in Israel. We've reached a population now of over 9 million citizens here. I believe it's over 6 million, between 6 and 7 million are Jews, which now, of course, changes the population center of where Judaism is. But is there a future for Jewish people in New York anymore, or anywhere in the United States, or anywhere in the world? There still are very nice places in America. There are pockets here, pockets there that are bad, and pockets here, pockets there that are very good. But where is the future of the Jewish people headed? Where is the trend, as they say? So I believe, and I've told you this on my shows many times, that the future of the Jewish people is going to be in Israel. If you are a Bible-believing person, you will concur that the future of the Jewish people is going to be in Israel. And we see in just the last 70-some years, or I can go back even further, the last 100 years or so, since the main thrust of Aliyah in the beginning of the 20th century, in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, early 1900s, where there was a very big push for making Aliyah for Jewish people, and there were thousands of Jews who made Aliyah during that time. And they literally took a land that was a desert, a land that had on its coastal region swamps which were infested with mosquitoes and where people would get malaria and would die like flies, many of them. It was a very hostile country geographically. And the Jewish people came after 2,000 years of exile. There were always Jews living in Israel, in the land of Israel, whether it was occupied by the Ottoman Empire, by the Muslims, by the Christians, whoever was occupying the land, the occupying power, there were Jews living there all the time. So the claim that Jews were not here and it was only Arabs and they called themselves Palestinians, etc., this is simply not accurate. Again, information. My father, a Jew, was the Palestinian, and the Arabs were Arabs. If you called an Arab a Palestinian back in those days, they would take umbrage to it. Because if you were a Palestinian in those days, it meant you were Jewish. The Jews had tzedakah boxes or charity boxes in their homes all over America to give money to Palestine for the Palestinian Jews. The Jerusalem Post was called the Palestine Post. Palestinian money had Hebrew on it. Hebrew letters on it. It had English letters on it as well because we were being occupied by the British, and it had some Arabic on it as well. But if you were a Palestinian, you were a Jew. So the future of the Jewish people, as we saw, developing from a dead desert land to the metropolis that we have today in Tel Aviv, to the high tech, to the research in agriculture, turning a desert into green, in health, in science, and technology, all of these things, we're seeing it bursting out here in Israel. Amazing things are happening here, and amazing things continue to happen here. When we get back, I'm going to be reading you from an article, very interesting article. Don't go anywhere.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I want to share with you this article that was written by someone who I think is a very, very good writer. His name is Hanania Weissman, and you can visit his website at hananiaweissman.com. We'll link to his website on the show where this show is podcasted. He writes a desperate warning to American Jews. A year ago at this time, American Jews were concerned. On Passover or Pesach of 2019, that was a year ago and a half, the Chabad of Poway was attacked by a gunman who murdered one person and wounded 3 others. It was miraculous that many more were not harmed. Several months earlier, a synagogue in Pittsburgh was attacked during Shabbat services. 11 people were murdered and 6 injured. The gunman told authorities that Jews were committing genocide and he wanted all of them dead. Politicians expressed their condolences and promised to beef up security. Neighbors showed solidarity with the victims. Organizations sent out press releases. Funds were raised. Hate in all its forms was condemned. It was a predictable script. So was the reaction of Jews across the country. They expressed requisite concern, made it a little more difficult for their institutions to be invaded, brought in someone to talk about self-defense and how to survive an attack, arranged a ceremony, then went back to planning their next happy occasions and summer vacation. We are in the galut, the exile, the diaspora, they said. Stuff happens occasionally. It'll be okay. That December, a kosher grocery store in New Jersey was attacked by 2 gunmen with tactical gear. Miraculously, they killed only 3 people. They intended to massacre children at the Jewish school next door and had a pipe bomb in their van, which they didn't get a chance to use. Days later, on Hanukkah, the holiday, a Jewish home in Muncie was invaded by a man with a machete who went on a stabbing spree. One elderly Jew was severely wounded in the head and died 3 months later. 4 others were wounded as well, one critically. The murderer, he writes, was a black man who didn't believe that Jewish lives matter. We were told that he was mentally ill, as so often seems to be the case when Jews are attacked, and therefore, presumably, this wasn't any particular cause for concern. It's less disturbing if there are large numbers of mentally ill people roaming the streets looking to kill Jews than if they are, quote, normal, unquote, people killing Jews deliberately. At this time, Jews were being harassed physically, assaulted on the streets of Brooklyn and elsewhere on almost a daily basis. Most of these incidences were chalked up to pranks, mental illness, or randomness. They would be investigated as, quote, possible, unquote, hate crimes because when Jews are attacked, we must not jump to conclusions that their Jewishness had anything to do with it. Unlike when people of other persuasions are victimized, the Jews were assured that these were isolated incidents and that the streets were safe. Nevertheless, for good measure, there would be more police patrols and schools would teach students not to hate. Problem solved. The sheer frequency of these incidents provided Jewish magazines ongoing opportunities to run feature stories on rising anti-Semitism in America, with predictable quotes telling Jews to be cautious but not to worry. Readers of these lengthy features would have no idea that Israel existed if they didn't already know it. Jews don't run away from anti-Semitism anymore. After all, the thought merely crosses their minds momentarily before they come to their senses. And if they did run away, Israel would be the least desirable option. No need to mention it. Lest readers complain that the coverage of these tragedies was disproportionate and there was too much negativity in their Shabbos reading material, no serious alarm bells were raised. We were always assured that the situation was under control. Leaders and organizations were on top of it, and it's not too soon to plan the next Passover vacation. Oh, And increasing numbers of politicians across the country, including members of Congress, were making blatantly anti-Jewish and anti-Israel remarks. And anti-Semitism on college campuses was becoming as American as apple pie. How ignorant! The offenders would be invited to tour Holocaust museums where they could learn from the pros and be inspired by their role models. This was all a year ago. Those were much better days. Since the Hanukkah attack in Muncie, all of the following have occurred. New York virtually scrapped its bail requirements, allowing even violent criminals to be released back onto the streets hours after attacking someone. In completely unrelated news, crime in New York City has skyrocketed, and it has quickly deteriorated from one of the safest large cities in the world to a very scary place. The mayor of New York singled out Jews for blame over the spread of the coronavirus. No other demographic group has been similarly targeted. Subsequently, random Jews were harassed and attacked on this pretext. The American economy has been devastated, with the full extent of the damage impossible to gauge. Millions of people have lost their jobs. Countless businesses have been closed, and the government can't print monopoly money fast enough. The average American had little or no savings, or was deeply in debt before all this happened. The following have all become normalized in the last few months alone: riots, looting, destruction of stores and businesses, harassing and intimidating random people in the street under the guise of, quote, social justice. Mobs of, quote, protesters stalking people outside their homes, cars being surrounded by mobs in the middle of the street, cities large and small descending into anarchy on a nightly basis, rows of stores boarding up to deter looters or closing completely, police officers being demonized and dehumanized, police officers being assassinated while onlookers cheer, widespread resignation of police officers, destruction of American monuments, demonization of American history, its historical figures, and its founding principles, demonization and humiliation of people with white skin, demands for people with white skin to surrender their homes, property, money, and jobs, calls for America to be destroyed. Schools and college campuses across the country overhauling their curriculum to mainstream all of the above. Sympathy in the mainstream media for all of the above. Heavily armed militias roaming the streets in opposition of the above. Increasingly deviant lifestyles. Sexualization of children. Indoctrination of children with gender confusion and sexual deviance. Churches and Bibles being burned. All of that became normalized in the last 3 months. There's plenty more. That was just off the top of my head, says the writer. Large swaths of the country have been devastated by fires and hurricanes on an unprecedented scale. In the past, natural disasters united the country. Today, the opposing sides celebrate when enemy states burn or drown. They don't even offer their thoughts or prayers anymore. All the major sports leagues have become overrun with political and social activism. No longer can Americans of different races and classes even join together in rooting for the local team. The activism and the reactions to it are bigger stories than the actual games. Even sports is no longer an escape from it all. The entertainment industry has dropped any pretense of being about entertainment. It exists to teach the masses what to think and how to behave. Corporations have become political entities instead of simply selling goods and services. Their advertisements often have more to do with politics and new morality than their actual product. What people buy or don't buy is a political statement with battle lines sharply drawn. Literally, the only thing that unifies Americans is a common currency. Referring to America as, quote, the United States is anachronism, and there is no way to repair it. For the first time since the September 11th attacks, which unified the country in a moment of collective grief, commemorations of the day were awkward and received little attention. If a similar attack occurred today, much of the country, including most of the young people, would side with the attackers. If terrorists hijacked a plane and crashed it into the White House, there would be dancing in the streets. To read more, look for where the show is podcasted. I will link to it. You've been listening to the Tamar Yonah Show. This article was written by Hananya Weissman.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.